Welcome back to J-Thunda's Music Reviews. And for today's episode, we have actually episode 4 of my new series where I take a look at the years 1967 through 2024 and I pick my favorite albums from every year. So like I said, this is episode 4, so we're going to be looking at my favorite albums from the year 1970 and ultimately choosing my very favorite from that year. And like I said in previous videos, I will have a playlist for the previous episodes. We started from the year 1967, and last week's episode, we actually did 1969. So if you're wondering what my favorites were from those years, 67, 68, 69, definitely check out the playlist below. Today's video, we're going to be looking at my favorite albums from 1970. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So the first album I'll mention here, probably a lot of people haven't heard of before, but I'm going to mention the album Fanny by the band Fanny. And this is a pretty cool band I discovered, I think either last year or a few years ago. It's actually one of the very first all-female rock bands, and those are far and few between. And this like I said, this came out in 1970, and listening to this album, I'm wondering why it didn't become more popular, because it has a lot of great songs on it, great musicality, and I think they're just kind of a lost gem in classic rock. So I would definitely recommend this album for anyone who hasn't heard of this band before. Some of my favorite songs from the first album are Conversation with the Cop, Badge, Take a Message to the Captain, It Takes a Lot of Good Lovin', and Seven Roads. So yeah, definitely check out this album if you haven't heard of the band Fanny before. And they actually have, I think, like 5 or 6 albums. They have a lot of albums. So definitely check them out if you listen to their first debut album from 1970, self-titled Fanny, definitely check out more of their stuff because they're actually a pretty cool band. Another cool album from the year 1970 is Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, of course by Derek and the Dominoes. A lot of people would probably consider this a one-hit wonder because obviously a lot of people know the song Layla, great song, doesn't really need an introduction. But there's a lot of other good albums, there's a lot of other great songs on this album. Not a lot of people have probably listened to the whole album in its entirety, but you've got I Looked Away, Bell Bottom Blues, Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out, Key to the Highway, Why Does Love Gotta Be So Sad, Have You Ever Loved a Woman, Little Wing, Thorn Tree in the Garden, and then obviously, the big hit song Layla, which everyone knows, but a lot of great songs on this album, so definitely check it out if you haven't heard it before. It's actually comprised of it's what you would call like a super group. I can't remember everybody that's in the band, but you've got one of the Allman Brothers, and you've got Eric Clapton, one of the best classic rock guitarists of all time. I'm sure there's other great musicians in as well, but like 2 really good guitar players in the same band, so definitely worth checking out if you've only really heard the song Layla. For this series, I'm mostly including studio albums, but occasionally I will throw in a live album, especially as one as epic as Live at Leeds by The Who. This is definitely one of the better live albums of all time, one of The Who's albums that I definitely go back to and listen to again and again. Yeah, sometimes live albums can be hit or miss, but this one, the band just sounds really good. Keith Moon is on fire. And if you get the expanded edition, not only do you get them playing really cool songs like Heaven and Hell, I Can't Explain, Young Man Blues, Substitute, Happy Jack, A Quick One While He's Away, you also get, and then there's a bunch of other ones. You got My Generation, they play like a huge extended version of that. Magic Bus, Summertime Blues. If you get kind of like the deluxe edition, you actually get the band playing all of Tommy live, which is a lot of fun. And Tommy, like I mentioned in the previous episode, 1969, one of The Who's best albums, and getting to hear them play it live in full, very fun. So yeah, definitely one of my favorite live albums of all time, Live at Leeds by The Who. In previous episodes, we definitely have had bands release multiple albums in the same year, either 2 or 3. 1969, CCR managed to release 3 albums. I'm going to talk about a band that released 2 albums in the year 1970, and you probably guessed what it is. They're definitely one of the pioneers of metal music, probably often cited as like the first true metal band, and that would of course be Black Sabbath. So their first two albums, of course, are their debut, Black Sabbath, and then probably their more well-known hit album, Paranoid. So their debut has a lot of classic Black Sabbath songs, including Black Sabbath, which is kind of the rare instance of bands that have like this a song title, album title, and band title all in the same album. So the band Black Sabbath plays the song Black Sabbath on their album Black Sabbath. Doesn't Can you name a few other bands like that? There's a couple more that come to mind. Let me know if you know what they are. But yeah, Black Sabbath, one of the coolest metal songs of all time. You've got The Wizard, which is a lot of fun. You've got NIB, one of the coolest metal riffs of all time. Then you've got the really epic Warning. You've got Wicked World. So a lot of great songs on that album. But then you've also got Paranoid, which I would argue is their best album. Maybe people would say it's overrated at this point because a lot of the songs get overplayed. But it's hard to deny War Pigs. My favorite Black Sabbath song, by the way. Such a cool song. Paranoid, of course. That definitely gets overplayed, but great song nonetheless. And you've got Iron Man. Who doesn't know Iron Man? Great song. But you've also got some, maybe not for like true Black Sabbath fans, but you've got some deeper cuts like Planet Caravan, Electric Funeral, Hand of Doom, Rat Salad, which is a pretty cool little drum solo, kind of reminiscent of Moby Dick a little bit, but cool Bill Ward song nonetheless. Then you got Fairies Wear Boots. So yeah, fantastic albums from kind of the pioneers of metal music. So Black Sabbath with their debut Black Sabbath and Paranoid. I've mentioned the Beatles a few times in this series so far, and this will actually be the last Beatles album we talk about because this is their last studio album that was released. Although technically Abbey Road was the last one that they recorded. This album was recorded earlier but released later. I don't know, it's confusing. But anyway, I'm talking of course about Let It Be by the Beatles. This album's a little weird because it has like some of their all-time best songs on it, and then it's got some like random like little 1-minute songs that aren't the best. It's probably an album I would put in my top 5, but it's nowhere near my all-time favorite Beatles album. But it's hard to deny some of the really good songs on here. Across the Universe, I Me Mine, Let It Be, I've Got a Feeling, The Long and Winding Road, and Get Back. Really cool songs. And then you've got some other songs like Two of Us and Dig a Pony. And then you've got like little 1-minute songs, which I'm not the biggest fan of. Dig It and Maggie May. You got One After 909 and For You Blue. So overall, kind of a mixed deal, but like it's just got so many of their big hit songs that it's hard to deny. And it's their last album, so definitely worth mentioning here. Kind of an end of an era, because the Beatles basically just took over the music industry in the 60s, and this is kind of their departure. And from here on out, there's going to be a lot more bands that start to pop up and that kind of take over the rock throne, essentially. So yeah, Let It Be, really cool Beatles album. And speaking of bands that would kind of take over the music industry, especially in terms of rock music, you've got Deep Purple with Deep Purple in Rock. This is not their first album. They had a few albums in the 60s that aren't my favorite. They have some hit songs on them like Hush and Kentucky Woman and some other songs. But I think this is where they really start to find their roots and cement themselves as one of the best rock bands of all time. They're in my top 10. I will link that down below too as well. They're in my top 10 rock bands of all time. And yeah, this album has a lot of really cool songs on it. Speed King, Bloodsucker, one of my personal favorites, Child in Time. If you haven't heard Child in Time, go listen to it. It's so good. Flight of the Rat, Into the Fire, Living Wreck, and Hard Loving Man. Great songs, hard-hitting songs, especially for 1970. So definitely check this out if you haven't already. And then kind of changing sides, not like really heavy rock, but like more kind of softer rock, I would say. You've got Elton John's self-titled album, Elton John. This is actually not his debut album. He had a debut album, I believe in 1969 or 68. didn't really gain him that much popularity. It might have had like one or like a couple of good songs on it. But this is where he made his mark on the music industry. You've obviously got the hit song of Your Song, definitely one of Elton John's more well-known songs. Great, but it's got some really cool deep cuts on it too. Like Take Me to the Pilot is a really cool hidden gem. I would probably put it in my top 10 Elton John songs. It's such a cool song. And a lot of these songs, like I said, are more on the softer side. A lot of them are just kind of him on piano, and then there's some strings in the background. I Need You to Turn To, No Shoestrings on Louise, First Episode at Hinton, 60 Years On. Oh, also another one of my favorite songs, Border Song. Such a beautiful song. A lot of these are just beautiful songs. The Greatest Discovery, The Cage, The King Must Die. And then I think if you get like the expanded edition or the deluxe edition, you also get Bad Side of the Moon, Gray Seal, which actually will pop up again in another Elton John album, which we'll talk about later on. And then Rock and Roll Madonna, so which are kind of more rock songs. But yeah, really cool album. I wouldn't necessarily put it like in my top 3 Elton John albums, but it's still really good. Yeah, definitely check it out if you haven't before. Editing Jake here. So I just realized that I forgot to mention Elton John's other album that also came out in 1970, which I actually like even more than his self-titled album, Tumbleweed Connection. This is definitely one of my favorite Elton John albums. It's a little weird. It's Elton John kind of making like a country album. I'm not a big country fan, but Elton John's version of country is very good. You've got songs like Ballad of Well-Known Gun, very good. You've got Coming Down in Time, and you've got Elton John, like some of them are just him and the piano. And there's one called Talking Old Soldiers, which I think is one of his most underrated gems. It's so heart-wrenching. It's so good. So definitely check out this album if you haven't already. I'm really punching myself that I forgot to mention, because this is probably actually my second favorite album from the year 1970. I love this album, and yeah, I definitely wanted to make sure I got it in here. So Tumbleweed Connection by Elton John, also from the year 1970. And a band that we've mentioned on here a few times already, CCR. They had their debut album in 1968, and then in 1969 they had 3 albums, which is pretty crazy. But overall, my favorite CCR record came in the year 1970, which is Cosmo's Factory. And there's just so many great songs on here. You've obviously got the hits of Traveling Band, Looking Out My Back Door, Run Through the Jungle, Up Around the Bend, Who'll Stop the Rain, their like 11-minute version of I Heard It Through the Grapevine, which is one of the best covers of all time, Long As I Can See the Light. So like all of those are on this album, which is pretty crazy. But then you've got some pretty cool deep cuts like Ramble Tamble, Ooby Dooby. What else is on? My Baby Left Me. Before You Accuse Me, Take a Look at Yourself. So this is one of those rare albums where like all the songs are great. I don't know if I would consider it a perfect album, but it is really good. It's definitely my favorite CCR album. So definitely check it out if you haven't already, especially if you're unfamiliar with some of these deep cuts. Definitely worth checking out. All right, so those are a lot of great albums from the year 1970. But was there any doubt what my favorite album from 1970 would be? Probably not. If you've seen the previous episode, you know my favorite band is Led Zeppelin. And yes, they did release an album in this year called Led Zeppelin 3. And I think this is one of their more underrated albums. I actually have this above Led Zeppelin 2 in my ranking. If you haven't seen my Led Zeppelin ranking, definitely check that out. I think I have this 5th place out of their 9 albums. It's nearly a perfect album. And when I say nearly, let me explain. So it starts out with one of their most classic songs, proto-metal song called Immigrant Song. Dun 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 dun. Great song. And then you immediately kind of go into like a folksy song, Friends, which transitions beautifully into Celebration Day. Really cool song. And then Since I've Been Loving You, one of the best just bluesy rock guitar solo-y songs of all time. Jimmy Page, one of his best moments in Led Zeppelin. And then you've got one of my favorite drum songs, Out on the Tiles. Very cool, deep cut. You got Gallows Pole, which again is more kind of folksy. Definitely one of their most fun songs. You got Tangerine, kind of an acoustic ballad. You've got That's the Way, another acoustic, really sad, moving song. Then you got Braun Our Year's Stomp, which is just a really cool romp. And then the one song that kind of keeps this from being a perfect album, because I love all of those songs, especially just that collection of, really hard rock, blues, and folk. Just, it's excellent. The one song that kind of keeps it from being perfect is Hats Off to Roy Harper. Not a bad song. It's just super weird, and it's not anywhere near as good as the songs on, or the rest of the songs on the album, I should say. And when I describe a perfect album, it usually means it's really hard to pick like your least favorite song, but for this album it's really not. It's Hats Off to Roy Harper. It's not their best. I would definitely put it in my probably top 5 worst Led Zeppelin songs, but nonetheless it's still my favorite album from the year 1970. I won't say it's not close, but I mean, yeah, it's definitely my favorite. And of course Led Zeppelin's my favorite band, so it's hard for me not to go with them. So yeah, Led Zeppelin 3 is my favorite from the year 1970. Alright, so those are my favorite albums from the year 1970. And of course someone is freaking mowing the lawn when I'm trying to record, but oh well, this is the end of the video, it's fine. Just so to recap, Fanny, a really cool debut album, all-female band, which is pretty cool. Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs. Definitely check it out if you've only ever heard of Layla by Derek and the Dominoes. They have a lot of other great songs. And now we have a plane flying through. Live at Leeds, definitely one of the best live albums of all time by The Who. You got Black Sabbath with the very first 2 albums, Black Sabbath and Paranoid, coming out in the same year. You've got Let It Be, the last Beatles album. You've got Elton John, not his debut, but his breakthrough album. You've got Deep Purple in Rock, which is definitely one of, it's not their debut, but it's kind of, I don't know, it's their album that really put them on the map in my mind. Not that their other albums aren't good, but In Rock is where they kind of solidify themselves as a rock band. Then you've got Cosmos Factory, my favorite CCR album. And then of course Led Zeppelin 3, my favorite from the year 1970. So let me know if you agree with my picks here, and just let me know what are your favorite albums from the year 1970. From this point on, it's going to be a lot of fun, because not that the previous episodes weren't fun, but the 1970s are by far my favorite decade of music. The 60s has a lot of cool stuff, but the 1970s is definitely my favorite. So a lot of these episodes might be a bit longer because I have a lot more albums to shout out and a lot more bands start popping up. And yeah, my 3 favorite bands, Led Zeppelin, Steely Dan, Pink Floyd, a lot of their best albums are from the 70s. So, I love the 70s. So yeah, please let me know if you enjoyed this episode. Like and subscribe and all that jazz. And stay tuned for next week when I talk about my favorite albums from the year 1971. And again, probably no surprise as to what my favorites, my absolute favorite is. If you've seen my top 10 albums list, or if you've seen my Led Zeppelin ranking video, you probably know what's coming. But definitely check out what other albums I love from the year 1971. So yeah, like I said, like and subscribe and all that jazz, and I'll catch you in the next one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.